This is Ben Davis, independent socialist candidate for House District 13 in Indiana. One of the biggest reasons I got into this race was to decrease harm for Hoosiers. When I look around the state, where do I see the most harm being done? While there's a lot, the most harm that I see is in our prisons, our concentration camps. And today I want to reflect back on some of Eugene Debs' thoughts on his time in prison and his perspective. So Eugene Debs, the best loved socialist agitator of his time, is to this day one of the best remembered radicals in U.S. history. He was a Hoosier. He was from Indiana. More than anyone, he brought the emancipatory zeal of the abolitionists into the workers' movement. His liberating message reached a larger portion of the U.S. population than any revolutionist ever reached before or since. Debs' passion for freedom and his unshakable confidence in the ability of working people to create a better world inspired millions. And even today, 100 years later, few are aware that this popular and influential radical wrote one of the most insightful books on prisons. Debs' only full-length book, Walls and Bars, first published in 1927, is a lively memoir as well as a stirring critique, drawing on his own prison experiences. He served time for his leading role in the Pullman strike of 1894 and was sent to the penitentiary again in 1919 for opposing World War I. In 1920, as convict number 9653, he ran for president on the socialist ticket and received 1 million votes. Debs explains in this book why prisons don't and can't reform or deter anyone, and how prisons, in fact, create criminals. He discusses prison labor and the links between prison and militarism. Above all, he exposes the class bias of the entire U.S. criminal justice system, showing that the prison problem is directly correlated with poverty. His conclusion: capitalism and crime have become almost synonymous terms. Arguing that prison should not merely be reformed, but abolished, Debs called for a socialism of solidarity, freedom and love, firmly rooted in industrial democracy, without which political democracy is a sham. Only with the advent of such a social revolution, in Debs' view, can society succeed in taking the jail out of man as well as taking man out of jail. So I've been reading this book over the last several months, and chapter 11, Poverty Populates the Prison, really struck a chord with me. And I'd like to read an excerpt from it to show how the perspective from 100 years ago is as true today as it was then. When we come to make an intelligent study of the prison at first hand, which can only be made by one who has had an actual contact with convicts and who himself has suffered under the brutal regime that holds sway in every penal institution, and arrive at a final analysis of our study, we are bound to conclude that, after all, it is not so much crime in its general sense that is penalized, but that it is poverty which is punished, and which lies at the bottom of most crime perpetrated in the present day. In a word, poverty is the crime, penalized by society which is responsible for the crime it penalizes. Take a census of the average prison, and you will find that a large majority of people are there not so much because of the particular crime they are alleged to have committed, but for the reason that they are poor and either lacked the money to engage the services of first-class and influential lawyers, or because they lacked the means through which they might have been able to put off the day of final conviction and sentence by postponements, continuances, and other delays, artifices, and subterfuges, in the handling of which high-grade lawyers are skilled adepts. A poor man cannot afford to pay fees to attorneys who often use their offices to dispose of witnesses whose testimony might be damaging to the cases of their clients. The poor man, caught in the meshes of the law, must run his chances, whatever they are, and take the consequences, whatever they may be. It is too obvious to require special stress upon the point that there are 1,000 ways in which the man with money who is charged with crime may escape at least the prison penalty from the moment that his bail money keeps him out of jail, and through the myriad technicalities his purse will permit him to take advantage of. Some of these technicalities, not infrequently, have reference to the personnel of the jury that will try his case, and other phases of the trial which can, by the use and influence of money, be made to serve to the advantage of the man who has it. Instances without number might be cited in support of this flagrant fact, but one will suffice for the present purpose. Charles W. Morse, a multimillionaire, was sentenced to serve 14 years in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary for illegal financial manipulations involving millions of dollars. It was a rare instance indeed that a man of millions should be sent to prison, and it was only possible through his having come into collusion with still more powerful financial interests. Now, prisons are not made to hold multimillionaires, but only the impoverished victims of their manifold manipulations. These favored few, who may be appropriate to themselves untold wealth, usually operate prudently within the law under expert legal advice and guardianship of the highest priced lawyers in the land. The imprisonment of one of them is an anomaly for which there must be special and extraordinary reason. Of course, Mr. Morse was not permitted to serve his sentence. From the moment the prison doors closed upon him, there ensued the most unusual solicitude on the part of the government for his well-being. Very shortly after Mr. Morse entered Atlanta prison, the Assistant Surgeon General and the next Surgeon General of the United States paid him a personal visit in their official capacities. As a result of their visits, either directly or indirectly, Mr. Morse was transferred to Fort McPherson and placed in charge of 2 special nurses. The examining physicians then reported to the department at Washington that in prison, the patient would die within 3 months, and that his release would prolong life to not exceeding half a year. Some interesting details which I possess could be added here, but a few incidents serve the present purpose. According to common report at the prison and elsewhere, including an admission from Mr. Morse himself, fabulous fees figured in the affair. A certain lawyer who formerly resided in Atlanta is understood to have received a sum in 6 figures for his part in Mr. Morse's release, and he is now practicing law in New York. Harry M. Daugherty, one of the acting attorneys for Mr. Morse at that time in 1908, who was later Attorney General, also received a fee which no poor man could ever have paid for a service which no poor man ever would have been the beneficiary. The man in the White House who issued the order that canceled the sentence of the multimillionaire and set him free is now Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. It remains but to add that Mr. Morse, who would have died 10 years ago, in the professional opinion of the physicians who examined him, is still alive and has once more come into collision with the Department of Justice at Washington in matters that are said to involve more millions. One more similar case is here cited. Frank Noble, a wealthy tile manufacturer, was sentenced to serve 4 months in jail in New Jersey in November 1922. Mr. Noble, with 29 other persons and 19 corporations, was convicted on evidence obtained by the Lockwood Committee in New York City of having violated the Sherman antitrust law. 5 physicians examined the wealthy prisoner, and as a result, their report to President Warren G. Harding ordered him released from jail on January 8th. Let it not be understood that any satisfaction would come to me from seeing a rich man kept in prison. I do not believe that a prison is a fit place for any human being, rich or poor, and I would not confine my worst enemy in its cruel cages. My feeling toward the prison from the hour I entered it was such that I rejoiced in the departure of each of those whose terms had expired, and I was saddened by the entrance of every man whose shadow was cast upon its grim portals. If poverty, of which so many are now the helpless victims, could by some magic of power be abolished, the prison would cease to exist. For the prison, as an institution, is cornerstoned by the misery, despair, and desperation that poverty entails. The reason I believe that the time will come when the shadow of the prison will no longer fall upon the land is predicated upon my conviction that the day will dawn when the scourge of poverty, the foster parent of ignorance, of morality, vice, and other ills that afflict the children of men, will be banished from the earth. During my prison days, I made it a special point in my contact with the convicts to ascertain to what extent their poverty, their lack of pecuniary means, was responsible for their imprisonment. The conclusion was forced upon me that an overwhelming majority were sent to prison only because they did not have money to take full advantage of the means afforded to those who possess it of escaping the penalties of the law in the prevailing system of its administration. When I stand before the turrets and battlements of a prison, I have a sickening sense that the institution is the negation of hope, the breaker of bodies, the blighter of spirits, a scowling reproach to society, and a towering menace to civilization. If any good issues from under its present regime, it is in spite of its cruel and repressive purposes and methods, not because of them. I am wondering in this connection what I would think of myself if I inflicted poverty upon my fellow man and then damned him for being poor by thrusting him into a steel dungeon to expiate his crime. When human society has become intelligent enough to realize the responsibility for poverty, it will also be humane enough to refrain from punishing its victims by consigning them to felons' cells. It is unfortunate that hitherto no scientific and comprehensive method has been devised of ascertaining and setting forth clearly to just what extent poverty is directly and indirectly responsible for crime. It may be pertinent to observe that here it is certainly not a flattening commentary upon society that so many find it easier to steal than earn an honest living. The law's delay in the prolific source of not only gross miscarriages of justice, but of the most cruel discriminations against those least able to bear it. Chief Justice Taft is on record as saying that such delay is a burning disgrace to the American system of jurisprudence. Here, let it be stated that the law's delay almost invariably serves the interest of the man who has money and to the disadvantage of the man who has none. The man of financial resources has no trouble to find legal technicalities through which almost indefinite delay finally results in his acquittal of the charges against him, or in the case of being forgotten altogether. On the other hand, the man who has little money, or none at all, is juggled by cheap lawyers through the courts until his means are exhausted, and then he is kept in jail for weeks, sometimes months, all the while his presence there swelling the revenue of grafting officials. It is in the jails where many young men are initiated into the ways of crime and are subsequently launched on criminal careers. When these men leave the filthy pest houses and come to realize the injustice they have suffered on the account of their poverty, and how indifferent society is to it all, they are apt to conclude that they must find ways and means to shift for themselves, especially as they now bear the brand of Cain for life. For having a jail record is quite as irrevocable as any other feature of their personalities. We call our prison system the Department of Corrections. That is a misnomer. It is a department of punishment, of harm, that doesn't help Hoosiers like you and me. We're doubling down on those prisons by turning them into deeper concentration camps for our immigrant brothers and sisters. And that infuriates me.